There's a strange moment that happens when you stare at old maps long enough. At first they feel familiar. Continents, oceans, the names you recognize. But then you notice the details that don't fit. A coastline that looks too confident to be imaginary. A landmass drawn with the kind of precision that suggests someone had seen it. And the creepiest part isn't that the land is there. It's that it isn't there anymore. Not on modern maps. Not in school textbooks. Not in the official story of what the world looks like. And if you've ever fallen down the rabbit hole of antique cartography, you've probably encountered the claim that after around 1870, a whole continent, something once shown repeatedly, was quietly removed from maps. A missing continent. Not an island, not a reef, a continent-scale shape. Something big enough to matter. Big enough to reshape history. So tonight we're going to do something most people never do. We're going to treat the map as a crime scene. We'll look at what early maps used to show, where they showed it, how often, and why. We'll compare the patterns. We'll trace the shift in map-making that happens in the 19th century. And we'll ask a question that feels almost illegal to ask. If a landmass appeared on maps for centuries, and then suddenly vanished from every new edition, was it a mistake getting corrected? Or a story being rewritten? Because here's the truth nobody tells you. Maps don't just show geography. Maps show power. Maps show what an empire wants you to believe exists. Maps show what a government wants you to chase. Maps show what a trading company wants you to fear. And sometimes, maps show what someone wants you to forget. So let's begin at the point where this mystery gets its teeth. There are old maps, real ones preserved in libraries and private collections, where huge pieces of land appear that aren't supposed to exist. The most famous examples come with names that sound like myths. Terra Australis, Frisland, Hy-Brasil. Some appear and disappear across centuries like ghosts. But the missing continent claim usually focuses on something bigger and more unsettling. The idea that parts of the southern world, especially in the South Pacific and the far south, were drawn as if they were connected, as if there was far more land than we're told. And to understand why that matters, you have to understand something about the era before satellites. In the modern mind, a map is a picture of reality. But for most of human history, a map was a mixture of reality and probability. Early cartographers weren't drawing the world as it was. They were drawing the world as it was believed to be, based on travel logs, rumours, partial coastlines, political interests, and sometimes pure guesswork. That's not an insult. That's just how navigation worked when half the planet was blank. If a sailor returned from a violent storm near the southern latitudes and described land-like shadows on the horizon, that could become a coastline. If an explorer mapped one stretch of shore and assumed it continued, the map would fill in the rest. And if a powerful nation wanted a region to appear claimed, contested or valuable, it could appear on paper before it existed in reality. This is why old maps are terrifying. They don't just tell you where people went. They tell you what people thought the world should contain. Now, there's a specific belief that dominated European cartography for centuries: balance. The idea that the Earth needed balance. Cartographers believed the massive land masses in the North Europe, Asia, North America had to be balanced by massive land in the south. So they drew it, a giant southern continent, Terra Australis, the unknown south land. And it wasn't drawn like a vague cloud. On many maps it's drawn with confident curves, bays, straits, like a place waiting to be colonized. For a long time, Terra Australis was treated like an inevitable fact. Not if it exists, but when we finally reach it. And then, in the 1700s and 1800s, expeditions pushed further south. The world started getting measured instead of imagined, and the great southern continent began to shrink. But here's where things start to feel off, because the missing continent theory argues that what shrank wasn't just a myth. It was something real, something that was on maps, for reasons beyond guesswork, and that after a certain point, new maps became strangely uniform, almost too clean, almost like the world was standardized. like a messy, complicated geography, was being simplified into one official version. So, what happened around 1870? Why that date? Because the late 19th century marks a kind of cartographic revolution. By that time you have industrial printing, mass-produced atlases, global shipping routes, telegraph lines, national mapping agencies, international conferences, standardized longitude, standardized naming. The map stops being a handcrafted interpretation. It becomes a product. And when maps become products, they become centralized. Instead of dozens of mapmakers each publishing their own version of the world, full of local quirks, you start seeing consensus, which sounds like progress. But it also creates a powerful effect. Once consensus exists, anything that doesn't match it looks insane. And if something gets removed from the consensus, it doesn't just disappear from paper, it disappears from memory. So the question becomes, what kinds of land were getting removed from maps as the world standardized? And the answer is real, documented, and unsettling: phantom geography. Entire islands, coasts, and even continents were drawn for decades or centuries, repeated by mapmakers who copied each other and later erased when surveying improved. Some of these were honest mistakes, some were lies, some were misreadings. Some were deliberate traps, and this is where our missing continent story begins to take shape. Because once you accept that maps can erase geography that once seemed official, you have to ask, what else might have been erased? Not because it was fake, but because it was inconvenient. Now, before we go further, let's set a rule for this investigation. We will not do the lazy thing, where we pick a theory and force everything to fit. We're going to do what your competitor does at a high level. We'll follow patterns, we'll ask questions, we'll track incentives, and we'll separate possible from provable. Because the truth is, the missing continent claim sits at the intersection of three very real forces. 1. The history of phantom lands on maps. 2. The politics of empire and exploration. 3. The psychology of how official reality gets locked in. So let's talk about phantom lands, the ghosts that used to live on maps. There are islands that appeared on charts so often that captains believed they were real. Sailors searched for them, governments named them, and sometimes ships died trying to find them. Some were caused by mirages, some by icebergs mistaken for land, some by volcanic pumice rafts, some by navigational error, especially longitude, which was notoriously hard to calculate until accurate marine chronometers. But the most disturbing part isn't that mistakes happened. It's that once a mistake got printed, it propagated. One cartographer copied another. Another copied that. Soon the ghost became a fact. And once a ghost becomes a fact, removing it becomes difficult, because removing it requires admitting the map was wrong, or admitting someone lied. In some cases, phantom islands were deliberate. There's a known tactic: put a fake detail on a map so you can catch plagiarists. If another publisher copies your map, including the fake place, you've caught them. That means, historically, maps have contained intentional fiction, not as art, as strategy. Now zoom out. Imagine a phantom island, repeated for decades. Then imagine multiple phantom islands, clustered together. Then imagine an entire region that, on some maps, looks connected like a larger landmass. You can start to see how a missing continent narrative forms. People notice the old shapes. They compare them to modern blank ocean. And they ask, why did everyone stop drawing this and the date around 1870 matters because that's when the world starts getting surveyed into obedience? Before that, you can have creative geography survive. After that, standardized charts begin killing the ghosts. But here's what keeps the conspiracy alive. Some of the old coastlines don't look like random scribbles. They look intentional. So let's go deeper. The missing continent story often points toward the South Pacific, a region that is even today strange. Vast distances, scattered islands, deep ocean trenches, submerged plateaus, and a geological fact that most people don't think about. Sea levels change. Over thousands of years, entire coastlines move. Land bridges appear and disappear. Islands rise and sink. Volcanoes build new land. Earthquakes drop sections of seabed. If you want a continent to vanish, you don't need sci-fi technology, you need time. Or tectonics. Now, some people argue the missing continent was something like a larger landmass in the Pacific that was known historically and then lost either through catastrophe, flooding, or suppression. Others connect it to legendary ideas like Lemuria or Mu, names that show up in esoteric literature and old speculative science. But the key point isn't the name. The key point is the pattern. Old references to land, old references to advanced structures, old references to advanced structures, old references to migrations, and then later, silence. So what could make an entire landmass disappear from maps after 1870? There are few possibilities, and each one is unsettling in a different way. Possibility 1, it never existed, and the mapmakers were wrong. That's the simplest explanation, and it's often correct. Terra Australis shrinks as Antarctica becomes better understood. Phantom islands get deleted once ships stop hitting them, because they weren't real. But here's where the missing continent crowd pushes back. They argue, if it was just a mistake, why does it appear with consistency? Why do multiple maps show similar shapes? Why do some coastlines have names and bays and detail? So we have to confront possibility 2. Possibility 2, it existed in some form, like a plateau, a chain, a partially submerged landmass, and mapmakers exaggerated it into a continent. This is more plausible than people think, because the ocean hides enormous structures. Ridges, submerged continents, microcontinents. We know this is real geology. And the moment you accept that parts of the world could be submerged, you're no longer debating fantasy. You're debating scale and timeline. Then there's possibility 3, the one that makes this story dangerous, that the land existed, was strategically significant, and then was intentionally reclassified, renamed, or erased from popular maps, not removed from reality, removed from public awareness, because there are things governments don't publish. Military charts, restricted surveys, classified navigation hazards, territorial disputes, and the 19th century was the golden age of empires. Britain, France, Spain, Russia, the Netherlands, the United States rising, competing fleets, trade routes, colonization. If a landmass or region was valuable, secrecy could matter, not forever, but long enough to secure claims, and after 1870, the scramble for territory accelerates. Suddenly, the map is not just a description, it's a weapon. So how do you remove a continent without anyone noticing? You don't erase it overnight. You change the story. You rename it. You fragment it into islands. You categorize it as reef. You move it into a footnote. Or you do something even simpler. You stop printing it. Because here's the reality. Most people don't verify maps. They inherit them. A new generation grows up with new atlases, and the old shape becomes a curiosity, then a myth, then a conspiracy, and the world moves on. But let's be precise. If we're going to build a script at the level of your competitor, we need concrete anchors, specific things viewers can visualize. So here are the anchors that make the missing continent story feel real. Old maps showing oversized southern land. Old maps showing phantom lands in the North Atlantic and Arctic. Old maps showing large land-like shapes in the Pacific. And crucially, the sudden cleanup period where those features vanish. We can tell this story like an investigation with exhibits. Exhibit A, the southern continent that used to dominate maps. For centuries, Terra Australis wasn't just speculation. It was an obsession. It appears on maps as a huge landmass wrapping around the globe's bottom, sometimes connected to what we now call Australia or Antarctica. Then exploration begins cutting it down. Captain Cook's voyages are a major turning point. He sails far south and doesn't find the warm, habitable supercontinent people imagined. That doesn't mean Antarctica doesn't exist. He just didn't see it clearly, and ice conditions made certainty difficult. But the psychological effect was massive. The dream of a southern paradise continent began dying, and yet Antarctica wasn't fully confirmed and mapped until later. Large parts of it remained unknown. Even in the 1800s, there are gaps, uncertainties, contested sightings, so old maps were forced into a transition. They had to shift from "we're sure it's there" to "we don't know what's there." And transitions are where myths breed. This is the first seed. A land that used to be drawn confidently becomes uncertain and then replaced by a new official outline. Exhibit B, phantom islands that lasted unbelievably long. There were islands printed on maps for centuries that simply weren't there. Some were discovered multiple times by different ships because navigation errors placed real islands in the wrong spot. When you correct the error, the island vanishes from its old location. To a conspiracy-minded viewer, that looks like censorship. To a cartographer, it's error correction. But the emotional effect is the same. The map changed. Exhibit C, the political standardization of maps. Once nations create official surveying agencies, maps stop being personal. They become national, then international, and when that happens, messy realities get simplified. Disputed territories become lines. Unknown regions become blank. Old labels disappear. Alternative names get dropped. In this process, something can be erased without a secret meeting. It can be erased because standardization demands a single story. Which brings us to the heart of your topic, the lost continent they removed from every map after 1870. If we want to tell this story at maximum cinematic power, we do it as a tension staircase. First, the viewer sees old maps with strange land. Then they see how often it appears. Then they see it disappear. Then they learn why maps are political. Then the story becomes, was it an accident or a decision? Now imagine you're a viewer in 2026, late at night watching this with headphones. What would hit you hardest? Not a claim, a question. So here's the question we build the whole script around. If old maps were wrong, why were they wrong in the same way? And if they were right, why would the world stop showing it? Now there's a deeper layer to this, and it's the layer your competitor uses constantly. He ties geography to human consequences. He doesn't just say the map changed, he says the world reorganized. So we do the same. If a continent was removed, what would it affect? Navigation routes, resource claims, shipping lanes, military strategy, migration stories, national myths. And it would also affect something else, identity. Because one of the most effective ways to control a population is to control its sense of place. Where are you in the world? What is near you? What is far? What exists beyond the edge? If you can shrink the world, you can shrink imagination. Now, is there proof that a secret committee removed a continent from maps? No, not in the way a courtroom would demand. But is there proof that maps have historically included major phantom features and later deleted them? Has official reality crystallized? Yes, absolutely. And that is where this video becomes powerful. Because your video doesn't need to prove the missing continent. It needs to show something more disturbing, that the world you think you know is filtered through published consensus. And consensus has motives. So let's build the missing continent hypothesis as an investigation. We start by showing the old world, messy maps, bold claims, unknown southern land. Then we narrow to the time frame, late 1800s, industrial standardization, empire competition. Then we show the mechanism, how phantom geography gets removed. Then we ask, what if something real got folded into that cleanup? What if a landmass wasn't deleted, but rebranded? What if it wasn't a single continent, but a scattered set of large land features, plateaus and archipelagos that were once grouped as one? And then we land the final punch. If history can delete land from maps, what else can it delete from your mind? Now, before we go any further, we have to confront a painful fact. Most people are shocked to learn that continents are partly a convention. The Earth doesn't come labelled. We decide what counts as a continent. We decide boundaries, we decide names, we decide which land is grouped and which is separated. Europe and Asia are one continuous landmass, yet we treat them as separate continents because of culture and history. So imagine how easily a missing continent could be hidden in plain sight. not by sinking it, but by redefining it. Maybe what used to be depicted as a larger southern land got redefined as Hundretic, Australia, a chain of islands, a submerged plateau not shown on standard political maps. And suddenly the continent disappears, not from the Earth, but from the way we draw it. That's the kind of twist that feels like conspiracy, but sits directly on top of how map-making actually works. Now, let's talk about the late 1800s again. By the time you hit the second half of the 19th century, the world is being measured aggressively. You have better chronometers, better longitude, better surveying, steamships, telegraphs, international shipping lanes, and with that comes a new demand. Reliability. A map that contains an imaginary land can get ships killed. It can waste money. It can embarrass governments. It can disrupt trade. So the ghost hunting begins. Mapmakers start purging features that can't be confirmed, which sounds rational, but it creates a strange historical illusion. It makes it look like the past was lying and the present is truthful. But the present is not truthful. The present is standardized, and standardization can erase nuance. So in our video we present the viewer with a thought experiment. Imagine you're a cartographer in 1850. You've got 5 sources saying a land exists, 2 sources denying it, and the ocean is largely unknown. Do you draw it? Most mapmakers did, because the map isn't just about what you know. It's about what you think is likely. Now imagine you're a cartographer in 1880. The biggest publishers are using shared data. Governments are issuing official charts. Mistakes are costly. Now, if a land can be confirmed, it gets removed, not because someone hates the truth, but because the system hates uncertainty. And that's the terrifying part, because the missing continent story could be not a grand secret, a structural inevitability, a world that no longer tolerates maybe. So it deletes the maybe. Now here's where we take the story to the emotional cliff. What if the missing continent wasn't a myth, but a memory? What if there really was a place, large, significant, inhabited, known under different names, hinted at in fragments, and then gradually dissolved in the public record? You don't need to claim aliens. You need to understand how information dies. It dies when it's inconvenient. It dies when it's expensive. It dies when nobody can verify it. It dies when the people who knew it vanish, and the 1800s were full of vanishing, colonized cultures, destroyed archives, lost languages, burned libraries, confiscated artifacts, redrawn borders. So even if the missing continent theory is exaggerated, the mechanism it points to is real. History can be edited by omission. And now we bring the viewer to the 1,870 inches moment. Why would a continent disappear after 1870 specifically? Because that's when maps stopped being a diverse ecosystem and became a standardized industry. Before you could find maps with strange features, because dozens of publishers existed. After, the world converged around official atlases. And once official atlases dominate classrooms, the alternative world dies. This is why modern people assume old maps were silly. They weren't silly, they were uncertain. And uncertainty is exactly what centralized reality tries to eliminate. Now we need a killer midpoint, something that makes your audience lean forward and feel that cold creep. So here it is. If you want to hide something, you don't erase it, you drown it in noise. You allow dozens of contradictory versions to exist for a century, so no one knows what's real. Then you standardize the story. And in the process, anything that doesn't fit gets labeled a mistake. Suddenly, the missing continent isn't removed by force. It's removed by consensus. And consensus is the cleanest censorship, because nobody feels censored. Now, let's be honest. Some viewers will want a specific missing continent name, so we handle that carefully and cinematically. We can say, some call it the remnants of Terra Australis. Some connect it to legendary lost lands like Lemuria or Mu. Some point to oversized depictions of land in the South Pacific. Some argue it's a misinterpretation of Antarctica's unknown coastline. But what matters isn't the label. What matters is the behavior of maps across time. They create reality, then they correct reality, and the correction becomes the new memory. So how do we make this story hit like a hammer at the end? We bring it back to a simple image. A child opening a textbook in 1900. The world is clean, 7 continents, neat oceans, names standardized. Now rewind 200 years. The world is messy. Unknown lands, vast southern shapes, islands that drift like rumors. If you were born into the clean world, you'd laugh at the messy one. But if you were born into the messy world, the clean one would feel like a lie. And that's the core of this entire video. The line between myth and truth is often just who printed the map. Now, we need to deliver the final escalation, the competitor style, it's bigger than you think ending. So we ask the final chain of questions. If the world standardized maps after 1870, what else got standardized? Language, history, borders, education, time zones, measurement systems. The late 19th century didn't just map the world, it reorganized how humans perceive the world, and if a missing continent story is false, it still points to something deeply real, that your reality is inherited from institutions. You didn't verify the shape of the planet, you accepted it, and acceptance is not the same as knowing. So here's the last thought I want to leave you with, because this is where the video becomes unforgettable. Even if there was never a literal continent erased, there are places that were erased culturally. There are roots that were erased economically. There are histories that were erased politically. And the map is only one layer of a much larger kind of deletion. The deletion of alternative worlds. Because the scariest possibility isn't that they removed a continent. The scariest possibility is that they removed your ability to imagine one. They trained you to believe the world is finished. Explored, catalogued, closed. No blanks left, no mysteries. And that is the most unnatural idea in human history, because the Earth is not finished. The ocean still hides landscapes larger than countries. The poles still contain unknowns. The seabed holds structures we can't casually see. And human history still has missing pages. So when you see an old map with a landmass that isn't supposed to be there, don't rush to laugh. Ask the better question. Why did people draw it? What did they think they knew? What did they want others to believe? And why did it disappear? Was it corrected? Or was it standardized out of existence? Because somewhere between ink and empire, between exploration and industry, between the world as it was and the world as we're told, there is always a gap. And in that gap, a continent can vanish, not from the earth, but from the story. And once something is removed from the story long enough, the next generation doesn't call it missing, they call it impossible. And that's the final trick, not hiding land. Hiding the idea that land could ever have been there.